I want to go right now to NewsNation's Robert Sherman. He is live in Lviv, Ukraine right now for us tonight. Robert, the thought that Russia has control not just of one nuclear plant right now, but two, that has got to be concerning for the people in Ukraine. What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, I'd say that the average Ukrainian doesn't even want to really think about the prospect of what is going on, because anytime that we throw around that word nuclear, that of course brings back those images of Chernobyl that we all know so well from all those years ago and the kind of damage that it wrought on whole communities. There's a couple things to remember here. So countries such as Ukraine, heavy reliance on nuclear energy in order to manage all of its power, to manage all of its power grids throughout the whole country. So you take the whole nuclear risk out of the equation for a second, that is quite literally a lot of power that Russia has over the country when they start taking control of these power plants. Put simply, the ability to switch the lights on and off in some of these major Ukrainian cities. Look at a city such as Mariupol, for example, in the south. That's an area which has, for the most part, lost power, and other resources are being depleted there, but it allows the Russians to exact a certain level of control over one of those communities. So that's the aspect of the nuclear situation that doesn't even revolve any kind of a nuclear accident or a nuclear weaponizing of the plant or anything of that kind. Of course, the latter is a concern that many people have. From a lot of the international organizations that manage a lot of this have downplayed any imminent risks that could be coming from any of these nuclear power plants. That doesn't change the fact that there are citizens of Ukraine here who are very worried about what that could bring.
Yeah, and you made a good point, Robert. I mean, if the Russians control the power plants, they have a lot of power over the country. Is there any word about another kind of agency that's doing any kind of oversight over these plans? I mean, it's alarming to think that it's literally just the Russians in there controlling everything right now.
And, from what we have heard is that a lot of the employees of these plants that were stationed at these plants before the Russian takeover are still, for the most part, there at these plants. So it's still people who are familiar with what's going on. The Russians are just running the show, more or less. In terms of international agencies, I mean, we have seen a few that have been involved that are trying their best in order to manage the whole situation. Internationally, though, I mean, there has been a lot of outcry over this. I mean, you look at some of the attacks that have been levied against some of these nuclear sites. You saw one expert in the field calling it absolutely ludicrous to seeing an attack like this on one of these nuclear power plants. So, I mean, it is definitely a concern that is down here, and it is one of those situations where we're all going to be waiting on pins and needles over the next couple of days to see exactly what happens.
I want to move on, Robert, to the fight on the ground. We saw a new video today of the Ukrainians shooting down a Russian helicopter. Where do things stand tonight? Are the Ukrainians still making headway against the Russians?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really good question, Brian. So I would say that when you are on the ground level, when you know what is happening on the ground, you have to keep in mind that the Ukrainians are defending their home soil. They know the country. They know the landscape. A lot of the cities that they're defending, they're able to entrench in, so they have a lot of those natural advantages. So we have seen the Ukrainian military continue to perform well against the Russian military. The biggest concern is still what is happening above. And the reason that you have seen so many Ukrainians call for these no-fly zones and call for the skies to be closed is because that is an area which can be pretty damaging to the Ukrainians. I mean, even where we are in western Ukraine, we heard air raid sirens going off this morning. We saw it happen 7, 8, 9 times last week when we were in Ivano-Frankivsk. Some of these areas in western Ukraine are getting hit with long-range missiles, especially some of the airports that you have out here. So that's the distinction. I mean, this war, here on the ground, it's being fought both on the ground, with from the military, but also in the air. And it's that latter which quite possibly is where this entire war is won or lost.
And one thing that I've wondered about is you see videos on both sides. I mentioned the new video of the Ukrainians shooting down the Russian helicopter, but the Russians are also releasing their own videos sort of showing that they claim that they're winning this war. Obviously, propaganda. You have to wonder whether you have to look at these videos really with a grain of salt on both sides, Robert.
You do. And I think that's a very important distinction to make here, Brian, is that this is different than covering any story that you or I have covered domestically here in the United States, where a government agency provides some statistic and the expectation is that it's either true or in the ballpark. You have the Russia, I mean, it was last week, the Russians claimed that they had only lost about 500 soldiers, which is some of the most that they've actually admitted to losing in any military conflict, I believe, since Chechnya. But then on the other hand, you have the Ukrainians claiming that they had killed off thousands of soldiers. So I mean, that's a huge disparity there, statistically speaking. So, I mean, and if you took only one of those sides at their word, you would have one perception of the whole war. And then if you took the other side, your perception would be completely changed. So you really do have to remember that both of these sides are trying to have this information war, shall we say, where both sides want to convince their people that they are winning, to keep morale high, to keep people invested. Because, I mean, if morale is lost, then all of a sudden you don't see those kind of successes that you're hoping for. That's especially the case for the Ukrainians. And what we have seen here on the ground, the far majority of Ukrainians do believe the war is going exceptionally well. Most everyone that we speak with is almost certain that the Ukrainian military will push the Russian advances out. So you do see that morale factor playing into account here in Ukraine, and that is going to be an important aspect to follow.
Yeah, the information war and the propaganda, to watch it happening in real time is just fascinating. I want to move on, though, to the refugee situation, because you've done such an incredible job covering that and talking to people trying to get out of the country. Where do things stand right now? Is there still this long line at the border of people trying to get out?
I mean, you've just seen the massive numbers of people who have tried to get out. 2.5 million, now north of 2.5 million, according to the United Nations. Just this demand in order to escape the country and flee to, for the most part, it's been Poland. That's been the country that we've seen this happen the most in. But, I mean, you've also seen long lines in places such as Romania or Hungary or any of these other countries as well. Just this mad dash in order to get out. What I would say is that you have people who are, that 2.5 million number doesn't tell the whole story, because there are people who are fleeing from Kharkiv or Kyiv out in the east who are coming to where we are right now in Lviv or another one of these cities here that's a bit more removed from the conflict. So 2.5 million, that's just a number of people who have left Ukraine. That doesn't take into account everybody who has been displaced.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.